Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this program. My name is Lizzie Meister. I'm the Public Programs Manager here at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, and I'm thrilled to get to share this program, A Southern Jewish Boycott, Hitler's Olympics, the Herman Neugass story with you. This is the second of our Sit a Spell virtual summer series, which is a free three-part online lecture series exploring the lives and impacts of three lesser-known Southern Jewish figures who played a part in 20th century history. Before we get started with the program, I always have to do a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. I ask that everybody remain on mute for the majority of this program. At the end, if we have the opportunity, I'll allow folks to come off mute to ask questions. But in the meantime, as your questions come up, please pop those in the chat, and those will be the first questions we read out in our question and answer section. That's all I got. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Kenneth Hoffman, the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience Executive Director, and Richard Neugass, and I'll let these two guys take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lizzie. I'm Kenneth Hoffman. I'm the director of the museum. I'm happy to be here with y'all today, and I'm going to read a few sentences that will help to introduce this program. Richard Neugass developed a love of sports and a fascination with the central role that they play in modern world cultures. We love our sports heroes, men and women who give us the World Series, NBA Finals, Super Bowl contests, World Cup soccer, Wimbledon tennis, and the Olympics in the summer and winter. We idolize these players and we pay them a lot of money to compete at the highest levels. But sometimes sports contests take on deeper meanings in politics and history. Such was the case of the 1936 Summer Olympics in Nazi Germany. Richard's father, Herman Neugass, a native of New Orleans and a Tulane graduate, was a world-class sprinter in the 1930s who boycotted the Berlin Olympics of August 1936 because Nazi principles demonstrated the antithesis of healthy sports principles, i.e., let the best man or woman win, regardless of race, color, or creed. The story of that Olympics is a legend unto itself. And Richard, I'm very happy to once again be talking to you. We spoke and did a program together when the museum was not even open yet, more than 3 years ago, about your father. And now that the museum has been open for 3 years and we have a much larger museum family and we're able to reach out and share our stories with more people, here we are during the Paris Summer Olympics, being able to revisit this story and have you add even more color to it than we did before. So great to have you aboard. I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, from Vermont on Zoom. If you follow the current Olympics, you'll notice that most of the headlines start with U.S. team did this or that. So politics still has a central role in sports, and it's true in all sports. So let's get to the Olympics. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to go through briefly each Olympics, Summer Olympics, every 4 years, and tell you some interesting anecdotes and show you some interesting characters. This is Baron Pierre de Coubertin. He's had the idea for reestablishing the Olympics from ancient times, and he was very interested in French education and especially physical education. Several years prior, France lost the Franco-Prussian War, and he was concerned that French men were not fit enough. So he came up with this idea and he applied it to application throughout the world. So in the first Olympics, held in Greece, there were 242 competitors and 200 of them were Greek. And the marathon winner was this gentleman, Spiridon Louis, who was a water carrier. And his winning the marathon made him a national hero of huge proportions. Here's Jim Thorpe, who won in the decathlon and the pentathlon in 1912. And many people think that he's the greatest athlete who ever lived. Just looking at him, I can understand why. This gentleman is Paavo Nurmi. Many of you may have, if you're into track and field, you'll recognize his name. He set the world records in the mile, the 5,000, and the 10,000 meter runs. And the last two, he did 4 hours apart.
Mhm.
These two gentlemen are from England and Scotland. The one on the left is Harold Abrahams. The one on the right is Eric Liddell. If you saw the movie Chariot of Fire, these two men's stories were told. Liddell opted out of the short sprint because it was on Sunday and he was a devout Catholic. He ended up winning the 400-meter run. Don't know if you recognize this gentleman. If you saw early Tarzan movies, you'd know that this is Johnny Weissmuller, who, he won 3 gold medals, and that success led to Hollywood and a successful career there. This woman is Betty Richardson. She's 16 years old when she won this gold medal. She then had a tragic plane accident. So a few years later, was thought dead, but they found out she wasn't. She rehabbed and came back to win more gold medals in later Olympics. Amazing story. This is Poland's Stanislawa Wałęsiewicz. I'm sure I have that wrong. She was accused of being a man, and I don't think she was tested, so she might be a he. She won 3 gold medals and was, again, a national hero in Poland of enormous proportion. And she was later called, let's see. Anyway, she had, don't remember the first name, last name Walsh. Her family came to the United States when she was a child, so she grew up as an American, but decided to identify as Polish in the Olympics. This is let's uh forget her last name. Stevens, the fastest woman in the 1936 Olympics. She was the star, another star along with Jesse Owens in that Olympics, and was the best track and field person of her era, woman. She was tested and was proved to be a woman.
Hmm.
So we have a modern example of that in controversies in men transitioning and competing as women. This is this is her winning the high hurdles. So now we get to the 36 Berlin Summer Olympics, often called the Nazi Olympics. And the story of my father, Herman Neugass. He was known when he was running as the Human Bullet or the Green Wave Express, and called Noogie by friends and family. He was born in Magnolia, Mississippi. This is his cute pictures. I don't know what age. This is before they moved to New Orleans. So he lived in New Orleans from junior high on and went to Tulane. He graduated from Isidore Newman High School, did very well there, and got a scholarship to Tulane. His father, Nathan Leo Neugass, whose business was a small retail store, and my father would remember trips in a little barge into the the Louisiana bayous to collect Spanish moss, because they collected and sold it. That was used in mattresses in those days. Highly flammable. So fortunately, they shifted to something else. I don't have a good picture of my mother, of my grandmother, Dad's mother. She was one of 6 sisters and a brother.
And Richard, let me break in and ask a quick question. You may not know the answer.
Sure.
Was Nathan and his wife, were they immigrants to the United States, or had the family been in the United States already?
Immigrants at an early age.
Gotcha.
From Germany.
Meaning that
Neugass.
Herman would have been a first generation, well, whatever you call it. His parents were immigrants, and he was the first native born.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Here's Dad as a freshman at Tulane. And there was another athlete on the team, I think a little older, named Howard K. Smith. That name may be familiar to people who are in television journalism. He was one of the first MCs for news. Here's Coach Fritz with Dad in practice for starting. Fritz was like a father to him. His father died when he was 13, so he was really brought up by his mother. And Fritz was a perfect candidate for pseudo father. And he loved him and My father never stopped talking about him and how he helped him in technique, etc. There's Dad winning, it looks like the 100-yard dash. Back then, they ran the 100-yard dash in the Olympics and also in professional or in college sports now. They run the 100-meter, a little bit longer. This is him winning against LSU, and the man on the left was Flats Harden, who was a very well-known Louisiana athlete. And he went to the Olympics and won the 400-meter high hurdles. But Dad always remarked, yeah, I beat Harden. Dad also ran against Jesse Owens at one time, and there were many top runners. But he came in second or third behind Owens, and it was only 2 steps, which is a long time in those runs. He tied the world's record, tied it in 9.4 seconds. It was not entered in the record books because of a 5-mile-an-hour wind, which kept it out of the books. But in this headline, it said he broke 2 records at Baton Rouge. The other one he broke at that time was the 200-yard dash, 220-yard dash, which he ran in 20.3 seconds. So a boycott of the 1936 Olympics was big news. There was a battle in the AAU board about boycotting or not. Brundage was on the side of, yes, we can't disappoint the athletes. We've got to go and show them what we can do. And Dad received this letter on the right, which I'll read quickly to you. By your performance, you have marked yourself as one of the outstanding candidates for the American Olympic team. And then he goes on to say, there have been people saying we should not go to Berlin. And to refute that, this letter was sent to my father and many other athletes to see what their athletes would say. In this letter, enclosed in the letter, was a postcard with 2 boxes, self-addressed, yes or no. So Dad, after thinking about it some, marked no and sent it back. And he never told anyone, not even his mother. About 2 weeks later, the Times-Picayune was interviewing an LSU runner who was Jewish, who said, will you go to Berlin if you make the team? And his comment, which was quoted, why, of course I will. Neugass is going. My father read that comment and wrote a letter, which really was the basis of his fame at this time. I won't read the whole letter, but these words are prominent. I personally would not have participated in such games in any country in which the fundamental principles of religious liberty is violated as flagrantly and as inhumanely as it has been in Germany. And then next paragraph, I feel it to be my duty to express my unequivocal opinion that I will not participate in the Olympics if they are held in Germany. Now, Germany had, in this controversy, had stated that number one, German athletes were allowed to train, and that if they made the German team, would be invited to represent Germany. Well, I'll show you the training. Well, first of all, the New York Times picked up his Times-Picayune. It was a letter to the editor of the Times-Picayune. And Jewish sprint star, student at Tulane, says German pledges have not been kept. Well, these pledges were a ruse. This is on the right, Jeremiah Mahoney, who at that time was president of the American Olympic Committee. And these two fought over that decision. And you can see the daggers in their eyes as they so-called shook hands. They were enemies. Brundage managed to win the vote in the board by 2.5 votes. So the team was scheduled to go. Mahoney dropped out. And this gentleman, Ernest Yankee, a New Orleans himself, was against participation. And because of that, he was on the International Olympic Committee. And because of that, he was dropped from that organization. But he was a very principled man. And the boycott brought out all kinds of voices, including this one from a pastor, Coughlin, who was a radio host with more than 1 million listeners. And he was anti-Semitic and really America first, and America first for white people. So Brundage, to see for himself whether the Germans were keeping their pledges, went to Germany and was hosted by this gentleman, Karl von Ritter. And he was very pleased to be a guest and was shown the better parts of their ruse. And he came back and said, yeah, no, the Germans have kept their pledges. They're doing what they said they would do. And one of the examples of their including Jewish athletes was this woman, Helene Mayer, whose father was Jewish. And she went back to Germany and participated. There are stories that her family, still living in Germany, might have been threatened if she didn't do that. But she came back. And this is another woman, Jewish athlete, high jumper, Gretel Bergmann, who was told, yes, we'll let you participate. Here are the training fields that they allowed Jewish athletes to participate in. But 2 weeks before the Olympics, they said, I'm sorry, you didn't qualify. So she was left out. And she went on to win the European high jump champions, etc. And so most people know the 36 Olympics because of this man, Jesse Owens. In college for Ohio State, at a meet at University of Michigan, he tied or broke 4 world records: the 100-meter, the 220, the long jump, and I believe a relay. Here's a picture of him in the long jump. This was at the German stadium. This is him getting ready to run. Just look at that musculature. He was phenomenal. My father ran against him and said, I could keep up with him once we were out of the blocks, but I could not get out of the blocks fast enough. This is another man who was challenging Owens for records in the sprints. His name is Ulyss Peacock. And he might have been the Jesse Owens of that Olympics had he not injured himself. And in the trials, he was too lame to compete. So Owens competed, and the story centered on him for the rest of that Olympics. Here we are, Hitler leading his crew. On the left is a man named Leybold, a German who had a grandfather who was Jewish. So they wanted to kick him off out of his job, and international uproar resulted. And so he relented and allowed him to stay. Hitler, Leybold, and his henchmen. If you've seen, there's a movie fairly recent called Race, the story of Jesse Owens. And it depicts when he came out into the stadium, the whole crowd went, JC, JC. He was the most popular man in Berlin. This was the torch run. We now have the torch run that goes through several countries. This was the first time the torch run going through different countries was implemented. And that was by another man who had a key role in the planning, named Heim, whose grandfather was also Jewish and was kicked out of his role. So here's Jesse winning, getting an award for the long jump. On his right is a man named Luz Long. During the competition, Owens ran down to the block from which you launch yourself. And Long noticed that he was fouling when he did that. So he came over as a competitor and said, you might try this. He did. He won. So Long ended up number 2. on the right. Long became a soldier and was killed in Italy a few years later. And his son grew up and married, and Owens, who maintained contact with the family, came to that wedding. Talk about sportsmanship and competition. And here the two are, Owens and Luz Long. Another interesting part of this story is that two Jewish runners did make the team, Marty Glickman on the left, Sam Stoller on the right. And they practiced, and everyone assumed, because of their showing in the trials, that they would be in the relay. The morning of that relay, the team was called into a meeting, and the American coach announced that these two gentlemen were not going to run, but that Jesse Owens and another outstanding black runner, Metcalf, would run in their place. And they ran, and this gave Jesse Owens his fourth medal by winning the relay. Here they are in the race. The German officials noticed that this baton toss right here might have been a foul. And they brought it up, but was overturned and didn't stay. So Owens and the American team, pictured here, won a gold. There's Owens, Metcalf, and the two white guys, Draper and Wyckoff, were from USC, which is where the American coach was from. So of course they were going to be in the race, but the Jews were left out. Glickman did receive a gold medal in his later years by the IOC, and Stoller did too, but he had already passed away. Here's Helene Mayer, who came in second. And according to this picture, you'd think, oh yeah, she's an ardent Nazi. She's with the program. But there's still a question whether that was true. But she did win a silver for Germany. So skip a few years. Here's my
Well, wait,
father.
before we skip a few years, just tell me this. Do you know if your father was listening to the radio or following the races in the newspapers during the Olympics, since he wasn't there?
Great question. I don't know about radio, but certainly the papers. He followed all the, especially track and field.
Okay.
So in the Olympics of 1980, I believe, it was before the Soviet Union. Soviet Union had just invaded Afghanistan, and Jimmy Carter boycotted that Olympics. We did not send a team. And my father was asked to come visit Carter at the White House, which he did. And it was noted that taking a stand based on principles was worthwhile. And here are reports about the boycotting the Olympics, which Carter did. in the Miami Herald of that year, this feature article uh, describing the whole event and Dad's role in it uh, appeared. In a building which no longer exists because of the floods in New Orleans, there was a room that included all Americans that Tulane had produced, and my father's is circled, and here's what it looked like before he passed, before the building disappeared. So I want to thank MSJE for doing this again. It was perfect timing when I said we might be able to do this during the current Olympics. And Ken and Lizzie, thank you, made it happen.
Absolutely. Let's stop sharing your screen for now and come back to us. And I have a few questions for you about this story. And I want to hear more about you growing up with your dad and what you knew about his story, about his time running for Tulane, about his decision with the Olympics. Did it have an impact on his life as you were growing up? And has it had an impact on your life, knowing the story?
As a young boy, I used to climb our stairs. At the top of the stairs on the wall was a plaque with his medals. So I asked him, so I knew he was a runner, and I knew just a little bit. I didn't know the details of how he boycotted the story. I always thought, oh, there was a big, he joined the boycott movement. He did not. He kept it very quiet, except for that article in the Times-Picayune. His story would have been a private story that never appeared.
And what kind of a man was your father? Was this sort of principled decision when he was a young man at a very important inflection point in world history? Did you see that personality trait, being perpetuated throughout his life?
He was loved by everyone he worked with, and doesn't surprise me that character trait was evident. I didn't know the full story until probably in my 30s, but now I've taken it on, and I'm delighted to be able to pass it on. It's ironic that it wasn't his running directly that led to his fame. It's this story and his standing up for his principles that made him an interesting footnote of the times.
Well, absolutely. And here at the museum, we talk a lot about, we tell specific stories that can have more universal lessons tied to them. And this is a kind of a story that when we have young people that come through the museum, this is sort of one of those what would you do type situations where we can ask, and those are sometimes hard to, wrap your head around because we're not in the same positions, the times are different, but still to see that everyone at different times in their life have options, have opportunities to make a stand for one thing or another. And sometimes making that stand requires giving up something, giving up the opportunity to compete in the Olympics for, world glory. So this is a really interesting story for us, especially being here in New Orleans. And I wanted to ask you, the Neugass family in New Orleans, the extended family, you have a cousin whose father or grandfather, I'm not exactly sure of the connections, but in the mid 30s, about the same time, went to Spain, Jim Neugass or James Neugass, to
Yes.
fight with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade against the fascists in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. So here we have two cousins in New Orleans, both standing up against fascism in two different but both very dramatic ways. What is it in this Neugass family that has caused such such a passion for liberty and democracy?
It's in the genes.
It's there you go. There you go.
No, no. Um, it's like so ironic how it all played out. And especially Dad's keeping everything quiet. Uh, he told me often that he didn't want to make waves. So he didn't want to, I don't think he wanted to be known necessarily that he was Jewish, but his hand was played by circumstances. And I have enormous pride for what he did.
Are you a runner?
No, tennis player.
Ah,
Oh, which reminds me, his father, Nathan, was the won the New Orleans tennis championship in I don't know, in the 20s probably.
wonderful. Very
Yeah.
athletic family. So when people say that Jews aren't good athletes, now we know that's not true.
Well,
Um,
that's a good point, Ken, because um, at the time of the boycott, there were a lot of people who said, Jews, they they can't, they're not good enough to be in the Olympics, so don't worry about keeping Jews out.
and you've given us examples of many Jews who were there or weren't there but could have been there. Absolutely. Lizzie, are there any questions from the participants in the chat that we can offer up?
Yes. Someone, this might not be one we can answer, but somebody asked to tell a little bit more of the story of Jesse Owens. If any, and his accepting his deal from Hitler. That one's one I don't know very much about. Anybody can tell a little bit more about Jesse Owens' story?
Well, I have heard, and I'm no expert in Jesse Owens, but I have heard that Jesse Owens also considered boycotting the Olympics, but had an enormous amount of pressure put on him to participate. So, but I don't know the particulars about that. Richard, do you know anything about that?
I do. In 1934, the NAACP said, you got to stay out of this.
Hmm,
And Owens considered it, as did the other black athletes. But the argument that won out was, you show them, guys. You go and show them what you can do.
mhm.
And in fact, some thoughts I've had over the years were, gee, Dad, I wish you had done that. I wish you had been there and showed them. But what he did has created much more pride.
Okay.
Oh, there is a movie called Race, which I
Mhm.
recommend you see. It's accurate in most ways, and it tells his whole story,
Great.
including, well, yes.
Another
Lizzie?
person asks or says that they're Herman Neugass's grandson, Michael Perrin, and has a video of Herman telling this story, the story of the Olympics that you filmed, Richard, and he asked if the museum wants a copy.
the answer is that is yes.
I'd be glad to.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. No,
Yes.
absolutely. We are. We're actually almost complete with building a Southern Jewish Family Research Center here at the museum for people to study their Southern Jewish roots. And one of the things we're going to be doing is collecting a lot of oral histories. And so I would love to hear, have that recording. So we'll talk about how you can get us a copy of that.
Indeed. Thanks, Michael. Michael, my nephew.
Um, I also put it in the chat, but if you would like to just ask your question directly, you can go ahead and raise your hand and you can unmute yourself. But in the meantime, I see a few questions about how folks, I'm assuming, has watched the recording of this conversation. In a few days, this will be posted on YouTube. That's what I can answer. But if anybody would like to ask a question directly, we can certainly get y'all talking. I also see some questions, some chatting in the chat. David Jacobson.
Yes. Hello to all and to Richard. I am a lifelong friend of Richard's, and I knew Richard's parents. So I can attest that Neugass, as he was called, as Herman was called, was, as Richard explains, a fine gentleman, just upstanding in his humanity, with a New Orleans accent throughout his life. He was a fine gentleman and a good friend, and Richard's mother as well, a wonderful lady, Nancy, and both were very good friends to my parents, Ruth and Harvey. So presentation was great. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks,
David.
David.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Two more questions that have come in. Was Herman's time in any race competitive and might have possibly been the winner of any race?
I'm sorry, again.
The question is, was Herman's time in any race competitive and might have possibly been the winner of any race?
Yes,
Of any, had he gone to the Olympics, would he have been in contention?
good question. Well, he tied the world's record. So he would have been up for it, and who knows how fast. But yes, he was within a tenth of a second in both the 100 and the 220.
And have you seen the shoes they were wearing? Oh my God.
Yes, and the track,
And the track.
singers.
Oh, no.
He won the Southeast Conference Championship in both 100 and 220. And that's why he was being considered to attend the trials.
Here's a question I have for you really quick. Do you know what Nathan, the father, and the mother, what they thought of his decision not to go? I mean, he kept it private at first, but then they finally found out. Were they like, Herman, what are you, crazy? Or what? Or we're so proud of you, or what?
My grandmother lived with us until she passed, and she never talked about it, and I wasn't ready to ask her. But she was enormously proud of his accomplishments, and she said that after every race, he would come home and soak in a bathtub to avoid cramps.
Yep.
All the time.
I do that just from working at a museum, but I understand.
Indeed.
Another question that has come in, how long did Herman's running career last past the Olympics?
Not a second, except as a young adult, he counseled high school track kids in technique. So he stayed involved in that way, but he did not compete anymore. In those times, there was no New York Athletic Club, or there were no avenues for continuing to run.
Interesting. I wonder if Newman High School has anything on the wall about him. Do you know?
It'd be nice if they did, but or that plaque.
I'll
That
check. I'll check for you. I'll let you know.
indeed, and they can contact me if they'd like to. 'Cause
Wonderful. Well, this has been great. Again, Richard, I want to thank you for your time, for sharing your story. Um, Lizzie, do we have any final instructions or thoughts for anybody?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you all so much for coming today. A recording of this presentation will be online. So looking forward to folks sharing this with the people in your lives. This is, as I said at the beginning, the second of our 3-part Citispell virtual summer series program. Our final program in this series will be next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Right back here on Zoom, where we'll be talking with Danny Fingerroth, who wrote a book about Jack Ruby, the assassin of Lee Harvey Oswald, so the assassin's assassin. So we invite you to come back to Zoom at that point. If you haven't registered for that, you can do so in the link that I'm trying to share right now. The best way to keep on top of us is to follow us on social media. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, etc. And we just appreciate everybody coming today. If you have any other follow-up questions, you can always reach out to me at lizzie@msje.org, and I can pass questions along.
And I'll add this last little bit as a promo for the Jack Ruby talk. Jack Ruby in his youth was very good friends with Barney Ross, who was probably the best Jewish boxer of all time. So from Chicago. So there'll be a little bit of connection between our talk today and our talk next week.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for being here, everybody. We'll see you next time.